Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Into the Hemaverse, your podcast for everything going on in the Hemaverse. I am, of course, Colin Vredenberg, and I'm here with my co-hosts, David Rao
Hey.
and Nathan Graperis.
Hello.
Hey, guys. How's it going this week?
It's about the same as usual. We were hoping for good news with the COVID and reopening, but it looks like we're still going to have to wait a while for us to reopen. So that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, the good thing about that is that it's not training as much, has given me way more time to dive into sources and reread stuff and read sources I've never read before. So I've been doing way more reading of historical sources than I would previously, just because I have way more time to do it. So that's the good part of
what
not
have you
being
been
able to
reading?
fence. Everything.
I'll pick one.
The one I am actually currently, I literally have a stack of books here next to me. So the main one is not here, but Meyer. So Meyer's 1570 treatise. So I have always really liked Meyer, and I have read Meyer before, like read through. And at one point, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I started to kind of try to like work through Meyer, and I was like, I'm going to give this up because I've already devoted so much time to the early Liechtenauer sources.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, you know what? I don't have the time to invest in this, but I've decided that I really am interested in Meyer. So I've been really working on Meyer, and I'm actually really excited because the more I read him, the more I realize what an awesome source he is.
Cool. I mean, like, I've also been kind of reading Meyer, but I also have a 2-year-old, so my week was like absolute garbage. Sometimes
you should just read Meyer to put your 2-year-old to sleep. Like, it's boring enough for them.
If only. She does like to look at the pictures, though. She likes to look at the men doing swords, and I tell her that the men are also wearing awesome poofy pants, which are great. I finished my poofy pants this week too. So
at one point I was going to commission. Jess Finley used to do. I mean, she still does a little bit of, but she used to do like commission historical clothing for people. Mm-hmm. And at one point, I actually was in serious talk with her in commissioning a Meyer 1570 style full get up. So like basically exactly like what you see in the treatise, but also using entirely hands sewn stuff, so historical sewn and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, it sounds very poofy.
It's poofy, and also the cost was ridiculous. And
I'm gonna guess like
not ridiculous.
$1,000.
It actually was. I think she quoted around like 1,000 or something. Like, this is also years and years ago.
That's totally fair.
I would.
It's actually totally fair.
It's
it's actually not at all. It sounds ridiculous if you don't understand, but if you understand how much work and knowledge and effort goes into that, then I mean it's absolutely worth it. I just ended up, for whatever reason, I ended up not doing it. But I still want to do that at some point.
Well, High Hill does High Hill pants. Is it High Hill pants? I'm not sure, but they do the jacket, right? And their jacket looks outstanding. I'm on the waiting list actually for my own suit. But yeah, I'm always looking for, another cool puffy pants outfit to fence in. So Nathan, what have you been up to, buddy?
I got my house back, so that's nice. I'm not out in the yard this week, so that's good. We wrapped up a month of training because we opened up at the beginning of June, and we don't have to close again, which is good. But there's a decent amount of people in the club who just aren't comfortable training, and so we're offering different options like video lessons or small group lessons or outside lessons and stuff like that to accommodate those guys. But
Nice.
luckily, so far, knock on wood, we don't have to close down entirely. So that's good.
Yeah, I mean that's great. It's not ideal, obviously, for anybody, but
I don't
what are you gonna
think
do?
anything about this situation is ideal for anyone except for people who own grocery stores.
And
I don't think for them either.
I don't know, man. They're grocery store owners are probably raking it in.
Yeah, I mean, every time I go to the grocery store, I'm always amazed how many people are there compared to previously.
Yeah, but that's the other thing, because they can only let in a certain amount of time. Like you can only let in a certain number of people. I don't know.
Not here, baby.
Yeah.
This is Texas.
Technically that's here, but no, not a single grocery store I've been to follows that rule.
Yikes. Yeah, I've definitely seen lines out front of my grocery store, but I go like super late at night when there's nobody else there.
I've only been to one store. I don't remember where I was going, but I've only been to one place so far where they actually like had a guy counting who has come in, like, did this person leave? Okay, you can go in. And I don't remember where it was. There's one store that I've been to. It's only one.
Well, guys, do you want
Enough of that.
Yeah, let's do some news real quick, and then we'll get into our topic, because I know it's going to be a great topic. We actually don't have a guest this week, which is we haven't done that since the first episode, but we have a really interesting discussion ahead, so I'm kind of excited, especially getting both of your viewpoints on some things. But so news first. It's really just the same three news, but there's been some cool updates. First is the Devon Boorman's Academie Duello GoFundMe. It is still ongoing. He is a great guy. We love his school. We love Devon. Please, if you can, give whatever you can to help keep his school going. It is rough for everybody out there, and we all know firsthand. But yeah, please help if you can. The next thing is I'm gonna go with the Destreza lecture, because I was actually just listening to Alberto Bompresi's lecture again in anticipation of our discussion, because I have no thoughts on my own. I only parrot and mimic other people, because I have been doing this for almost exactly 1 year now.
That's what we all do.
My first tournament would have been next week, as a year ago next week. So, but yeah, so the Destreza lectures are still ongoing. This week is George Zacharopoulos.
Sounds right.
Yeah, my daughter has a Greek name, and I still can't pronounce Greek names. Did you not know my daughter's name is Calliope?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Calliope. Yeah. I love Greek names. I'm terrible at pronouncing them. So yeah, this week is George Zacharopoulos's lecture. It was last night. We're recording this on Friday, but it should be up very, very soon. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to follow along with me. Finally,
I was just gonna say, if you've never had the chance to work with George, he's a fantastic instructor. He's also one of the most fun people to hang out with and talk to. He's just a blast.
He's one of the two, well, I would say three big fast friends that I made at FO the year I went last year. But yeah, he was teaching a class on Destreza, and Hank Macklemore and I decided to join in, and I kind of got hooked on Destreza accidentally. So he is directly responsible for that.
That his one flaw is the fact that he does Destreza.
Well, he didn't always. he himself says he used to do Italian, then it hurt his back, and he was like, "No, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm gonna stand up straight like a gentleman." What a great guy. I'm really looking forward to his lecture. I missed it last night, but I'm gonna be watching it when it airs on YouTube. Hopefully, they usually get it up over the weekend, so please watch and support. It's done by Sacramento Sword School. Finally, in the news, we have the start of Swords Without Borders, which is the fundraiser put on by Bill Grandy to benefit Doctors Without Borders. It is a raffle fundraiser. There's a ton of prizes. The prizes are awesome. I'm
like
telling you.
14 prizes, I think.
I think 14 prizes. Yeah, it is just a ton of really cool stuff. If you get a chance, definitely check it out. I think if to actually enter is only like $10 or something. It's like a $10 donation to get a ticket.
Yeah.
But then also people have been submitting their YouTube videos. There's a bunch of rules that you have to follow, of course. But if you submit a YouTube video and it gets into the playlist, like if it's approved by Bill to get into the playlist, you get an additional 5 entries to however much you spent. And I think the minimum is like $10. So really cool. Please make some great content for us all to watch, and then watch the full thing, watch the full playlist, and like the ones that I don't know you like. That's usually how that works. And the one that gets the most likes will get an additional 5 entries. So really cool. Definitely check it out. I'll leave a link to description. I'll put up some pictures of some of the cool prizes. They're pretty awesome. Please check it out. So cool. It ends July 30th. So that's your cutoff date. And I think he already met the initial goal, and now they're on stretch goal. So apparently it's working.
And literally it didn't officially like the submission thing didn't start until I think the 1st of July.
Yeah, that's right.
And they had already met their initial goal by then. So it's awesome. So hopefully there'll be a bunch of stretch goals.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how much money we can raise for such a good cause. All right. So
I actually have one more thing.
Oh yeah,
I forgot.
Please.
Speaking of making videos, and because of the lack of being able to like train, I am actually going to be starting a I guess like in Facebook instructor page. And I plan on doing mainly posting just videos of one of my main goals is going to actually just be like making a catalog of techniques from sources. So like, here's this source, this action. So it's still kind of in the works, but I'm hoping to start working. I mean, I'm working on it currently. I'm hoping to start recording some videos actually like this weekend and start getting those up. So that little self-promotion there, but I think I'm excited about it.
Do you have the page set up?
I do not. Yes, but it's not public yet.
All right. Well, as soon as it goes public, it will be linked in the description.
We'll have the description there. And before we go any further, don't forget to click that like button.
Oh,
and if
yeah.
you're not subscribed, subscribe, because it's really important for basically the algorithm for more people to see us.
Yep.
For us to show up in their feeds.
It helps so much. Like, you think that like the 2 seconds to click a like button doesn't help that much. Oh man, it helps a lot.
It helps so much. Yeah.
Let's talk about our main topic, guys. So the main topic this week, proposed by David, which I thought was a really cool idea. The topic this week is, what is fencing, or what is Hema? And we don't have a guest, but what we're going to do is kind of take inventory. We've had 4 guests on the show so far. Each one of them had a very different perspective on what Hema is and what it's about. They kind of fill different roles in the Hema community, definitely. And I think that the main idea here, as David has put it forth, is to take those ideas and our ideas and have like an episode of, I guess, self-discovery, like talking about what we do, why we do it, what's the purpose, right?
Yeah,
And
like let's have a conversation about fencing and
yeah,
get our perspectives on fencing and Hema.
yeah, which I think is definitely a it's a jumping off point for sure. But yeah, so would you like to start with our preconceived notions of what fencing is? Dive right into it and go
First, well,
Marshall versus what do we do here?
yeah. Well, I mean, first, I think it's important to talk about just what is fencing,
Mhm.
and like what that means to you, right, or to me, right, or to, and
I guess
one thing
Nathan
I'll
too.
talk about is that actually I'm using the word fencing because so when people hear the word fencing, what do people think of? They think of like Olympic fencing, right? Usually they hear fencing and think of foil fencing, but the word fencing just comes from the art of defense, and historically it actually didn't even mean necessarily sword fighting. It meant learning to defend yourself. So even unarmed fighting was uh, considered, learning to do that was considered fencing. So when I say fencing, that's kind of what I'm referring to everything. Um, and I actually don't remember now who first. Actually, I should have looked this up. I don't remember who first made this quote, but the best definition for what fencing is, I think, as a just distillation, is fencing is the art of learning how to give a hit to your opponent without receiving a hit. So to hit without being hit.
Mhm.
And you could, if you were you could kind of expand on that. Like if we're talking about wrestling, right, which is also part of Hema. We don't think of it as fencing, but it's part of Hema.
Mhm.
It's the art of throwing the opponent without getting thrown, right? So the whole idea behind what fencing is learning how to defend yourself and to be able to hit the opponent without getting hit. And actually, one more thing, going back to why it's called fencing, right? It's when you look at historical treatises, they always say the art of defense, not the art of offense, right?
Mhm.
So fencing is not learning to attack, although that's part of it. What's primary to it is learning how not to get hit,
Mhm.
right?
And I
And then
think that that's also borne out in like so many, like the idea of not like killing somebody, right?
Mhm.
Somebody attacks you. We'll probably get into this later, but I like recently I've been thinking a lot about proportional responses to violence and other things because this is the world we live in now. But specifically, like with this, makes total sense, right? Somebody is attacking you, you respond proportionally, but the goal is always defense.
Yeah. Um, Now, what's interesting is from a historical perspective, that's not always true, because there's examples, right, of you know in certain types of duels that if I am the if I'm the one who's been challenged to the duel,
Mm.
and we attack at the same time, or I attack, you counterattack, we both hit each other, we both die, I win because I was the I was the accused, right? Or vice versa, right? So you could challenge that idea about fencing being the art of hitting without getting hit. But to me, that's kind of the best way for me personally, and when I explain fencing, that's what I think I'm always trying to instill in people.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, like, so for me, it's not so much that as I'm a very sport heavy fencing person, and I don't know how the internet's going to take that. But yes, I mean,
You sport
obviously,
fencer.
yeah, exactly. I did do sport fencing
Why are
in
you ruining Hema?
in high school, but I'm clearly ruining Hema.
I took a sport fencing lesson last week.
I know, right? And you loved it.
Yeah, it was very good.
Yeah. So I mean, like, as much as you're saying it's the idea of hitting somebody without getting hit, like, I totally get it. To me, though, fencing might be more of it's more of a sport endeavor. It's like, I want to go to tournaments and I want to win, and it just so happens that winning in the way that I want to win and the way that I want to better myself to win better and win more often is to study historical sources and find out how they did it, because they walked the walk. And so then luckily they talked the talk in their books and we can read about it.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
There
Meyer just keeps talking, but most everybody else.
Well, what's funny is you can't always trust the source, because there's at least some examples of fencing treatises that we know are written by people who, as far as we know, they might have never fought, not even just like a duel, but they may have never even have actually like fenced. Like they're literally like, I'm gonna write a treatise about fencing. I don't know what I'm talking about, but this is what I think fencing is.
Yeah.
There's at least a couple of examples of that.
Yeah.
Like literally armchair fencing.
We haven't heard from someone in the group yet.
No? You guys are just talking away.
Well, we're talking about what fencing means to us, or what
I mean, David basically, hit the nail on the head that to me, it's the idea of hitting without getting hit. I think one of the things, and we'll probably dive into this a bit later. One of the things that people might make a mistake in doing is thinking that it's too much about not getting hit. Like, obviously that's important to not get hit, because if you die, then you can't go hit more people. But the first point of it is to hit the other person, and then almost as importantly is to not get hit back. Because if the primary goal was to not get hit at all, then why would you fight at all?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't
you would just run away?
Why wouldn't you just practice parkour instead? Like,
true.
Like,
well, I mean, they did though. They did practice parkour.
I'm sure that they did, but
I mean, according to Jean Rene, right?
That's right. But point being, it is first about hitting the other person, and second about not making sure that you don't get hit. And that's basically, like I said, David said exactly my thoughts on it. So I was like, well, yeah, pretty much.
And on that note, and this is the can of worms that we can open, is doubles, right? People hitting each other, or both. And one thing that you see quite often is that, one, there's so many techniques that are counters for after you've been hit by the opponent, or what you do after you hit, or that are, I mean, there's bunches of examples of this. And we know, for instance, from some of their fencing rules, if there's a double hit, whoever hit higher wins.
Belgians.
Right? So there's not actually, it doesn't even, I mean, it's we don't know. The problem is there's also so much of this that we don't know for sure. But the idea seems to be that doubles are okay as long as you hit the opponent better than they hit you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's again, we'll dive into all the nuances in a bit, but I know that there's examples in the original sources, them saying if you take a schnitt to the hand, that's okay as long as you plunge your sword through their brain. Like,
Yep.
I'd take that trade.
Yeah, that's the counter. The schnitt to
I'll
the
get
arm.
stitches.
You
You will get a
duplirin.
grave.
Yeah, you duplirin when they exactly right. Or even at least Schnauer, to go along with that, talks about if they're going low, just go high, and because you're probably going to do. I mean, we don't know exactly what. To me, I don't know exactly what he means by that, but it seems to be the idea being that you don't need to worry so much about someone who's attacking low, because by attacking high, you are going to do more damage to them than they're going to do to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not like, and even though I definitely come at this from a very sport aspect kind of focus, I can definitely see, like, obviously it sucks to take a wound in your leg, but it's not like losing an eye. Like and so, like, I think that a lot of times we'll give this like idea that different value targets is like a sporty thing and not really a martial thing, or I get it, and sometimes it is kind of a sporty thing for the purpose of later being martial, which we talked a little bit about with Jean-Ri and the games that they would play, like fencing games. You definitely have that idea of, like, Dave and my personal game of trying to nail each other in the foot,
Which is historical.
which is historical, but also it teaches you such an amazing feel for distance and timing, and because you're really exposing your face. So if you don't want to get not hit in the face, you better have a really good time, a really good tempo to attack a foot if you're going for that foot. And then if you get it and you don't get hit in return, then it's like all praise and glory be unto you.
Yeah. It's literally, it's at the beginning of Manciolino's treatise where he talks about like play, right? Or free play, right? Fencing.
Mhm.
And he says, I think it's 1 point for a hit and 2 points for a hit to the foot, because it's so difficult to do without being hit.
And so a lot of people would say that's so sporty. Like that's like sport fencing, right? I think that that's kind of something that somebody would take away from that, because he's manufacturing the idea that the foot is a valuable target when martially it's not so much. I mean, yeah, it would suck to walk on it, but you're not going to like die, and you could probably still fight even with a stab wound in your foot. You could probably still fight.
Possibly.
But the idea is now you gain a different martial perspective on what you're doing. Is that so that high value foot target seems like it's just but it's actually a device to get you to improve your martial fencing, which I was like, yes, Jean-Ri.
We had we had a tournament here years ago. I think it was the last of the Factual Americas before Scott Brown moved to Orlando. And he had just recently gotten into Manciolino's book, and so the rules for the event were structured around that idea about foot strikes to the foot being worth more. And like, oh my God, you should have heard how many people were whining and complaining. Everything from like, that's not martial, to, oh well, if you do that, like you're incentivizing people to break their feet because it's dangerous. And it's like, no, you just suck at it and you just don't want to do it.
It's hard.
It's
hard. It's so hard.
So on that note, I will say, don't do that unless you're using flexible swords.
Oh yeah,
because it is easy to hurt someone's foot. So make sure that you have a nice swords. Yeah.
Just to be clear with everyone, we did it with side swords, not fetters.
Jesse Belsky, stage swords.
Yes, exactly.
But make sure you have a very flexible blade for that. But yeah, I mean, I will do this especially when I'm teaching beginners. I will hit them in the foot, because what happens is they start creeping in and they don't realize how close they are. And it's actually, you would think hitting the foot is but it's actually it's a fairly close target, because you only have to extend a little further, and it's actually usually easier to hit the foot than it is to hit like the thigh in terms of distance. And it's such a great technique for getting someone to respect the distance and be like, oh, I need to control how close I am. I didn't realize that I was so close that I was able to be hit without, before I had time to react.
Which I would say is on. I was reading something not too long ago, but that's like the number one problem that that Hema fencers have, is that they don't realize how close they are. And so when they start on opposite sides of the thing, they immediately try to take control of the center, and then they're like, oh crap, I'm like hugging my opponent. Like, how did I get here? And believe me, I was the biggest offender for the longest time. And I think that's why David kept hitting me in the foot. And then I was like, aha, I'm going to hit you back. And then I gained a healthy respect for distance and understanding where I was. But otherwise, yeah, I think that I see that as an error more often than I see almost any other footwork errors. Yeah, there are a ton. I do it myself. But yeah, I see it all the time, and it's
yeah, to me, I mean, when I say footwork, right, what am I really? I'm talking about distance usually, right? I mean, yes, it's moving your feet well, but also it's about controlling the distance. And that's to me, that's Hema's currently the biggest problem, is people don't know how to control distance, right? And they don't know about, like you said, and you'll see this in free fencing, you'll see this in tournaments. Fencers will start basically when they're already in range, and then they start fencing, or they'll start out of range, they come into range, and then they start fencing.
Yeah,
and that's not how it should be.
So I'll actually even own up. This is 100% how I lost my every match at Lord Baltimore's last year. Every single rapier match. That's how I lost it, because I walked in, and specifically the guy that ended up with the gold medal knocked me out of the rapier first blood tournament. He is a great fencer, and he had a very long rapier, and he had a very long reach. And I was like, herp de derp, I'm going to just walk in here, and in the middle of my forehead immediately. And it seemed like it came from a mile away, but then I looked down at where my feet were and where his feet were, and I had been in distance for like 2.5 steps.
Yep.
I'm a garbage fencer. And it's just at one point it dawned on me, and I'm like, oh, I need to be better. This is bad. But yeah, you know what? And the whole foot thing absolutely taught me that. It taught me how to that A, I was doing the wrong thing, and B, how to do the right thing. So
as a side note, it's important to be aware also that there are things that you can do in a fencing match that are effective towards your goal of hitting them and not getting hit ultimately, or winning the match, or whatever you want to call it, that don't involve the blade before you even get to that point. Like you can play footwork games, and Hema most of the time, by and large, we have circular rings, and that leads people to very naturally, they come together and then they start circling and trying to find the opening, and then they'll blah, 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 and they go back, right? Well,
you mean the goldfish effect?
The goldfish effect.
Goldfish effect, yeah.
But I found out, I did this at a tournament a number of years ago, and it was in a final, I think, against Axel Pedersen, and he was trying to circle me, and I was like, well, I don't want you to do that, because you want to move that way because you feel like it will give you some kind of benefit if I allow you to move that way. So I just move this way. He's moving this way, expecting me to move like this, and I just move like this, and it freaked him out. And he like for a few minutes, he didn't really know how to handle it, because he would try to then circle the other way, and I would just cut him off. Circle the other way, and I just cut him off. And we weren't even engaging with weapons at that point. We were outside of range, but I was already beginning to play the psychological game of no, you're not going to get to do what you want to do. You're going to do what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
I would
that's
say
a huge problem.
I have to say, I have only seen Nathan fight. I have actually never fenced you, first of all, which is a tragedy. I know it's a tragedy because I asked for one at Foe, and then obviously you were running the event and you were never able to fence with me. And then Capital Clash this year was the next time we saw each other, and my knee
And you
was
were
completely
weak.
out of. Yeah, I was gimped. But I will say, from watching you at Clash, you are the king of two things, and one is the psychological game, and as a subset of that, you are the king of tilting the out of your opponent. And boy, does hitting somebody in the foot or just like putting them off their game to such an extent that they are just upset in some way in their brain. Man, is that an effective strategy? And I
It's
would
really,
literally
really fun doing that to
enjoy
people.
it over and over and over again. And I was like, God, I'm gonna hate fencing you, but I really
It won't be too bad because I actually hate fighting people my height or shorter, like most of all, because it happens so seldom that I don't get to like actually train against it. Usually, like the taller you are, the better. But if you're like my height or shorter, I think I fought fence. It was either sparring or in a tournament with Kiana Shurkin a number of years ago, and I was like, "What are you doing? Stop it! Is this what people feel like fighting me? I hate it. Leave me alone."
Yeah, and that annoying and irritating your opponents is totally historical. I mean, we have lots of references to that sorts of thing in the treatises, about doing that in order to unsettle your opponent, right? And that's
nothing unsettles you like a hit to the foot.
or to the arm, right? Like it doesn't have to be something that's going to end the fight. But if I hit you and you realize you've been hit, now there's some fear there, right, of it happening again. So now I have some psychological advantage over you. Even if I didn't actually, if we're talking about a sharp sword, even if I didn't wound you, I hit you, right?
Yeah.
That changes your mindset, and it's same thing in tournaments. I always tell people that, like, when I'm teaching a feint is only effective after you've hit your opponent, right? So or you've made them afraid of your direct attack.
Yeah.
Because if they're not afraid that you're going to just hit them, then they're not going to react to the feint, right? So you have to make them afraid. And one of the best ways of doing that is to tag them on the arm, to just come in and just boom, get them on the arm, and they go, oh. You do it a second time, and now they're like, right? And they might get upset, but then that allows you to set up, okay, I'm going to come in now here. You're going to think I'm going to go for the arm, and now I'm going to hit you there.
Yeah, you intentionally bait the shallow target in order to hit a deep target. Yeah.
Wow,
we're kind of off topic a little. Well, no.
Yeah, I mean, no, we're talking. This is fencing, right?
This is fencing.
And one thing I want to say, actually, you mentioned about Nathan, right? About circling, right?
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem that we still see, right? And I think people think that footwork means moving your feet, but this is not controlling distance, right? Because you are staying at the exact same distance as you circle. And we know that multiple sources talk about the idea of approaching and then withdrawing, right? And so that fencing, and it doesn't have to be sport fencing in a straight line, right? Like, although it can be, right? Doesn't, but even when you're moving in a circuit, like, you need to be closing distance and breaking distance, And the whole purpose of moving to the side and to move circularly is, like Fabra says, is to gain distance on the opponent.
I was about to
right?
say that, but I was like, he's
Right?
going to get to it. Yeah. 100%.
So he's not telling you to circle for the purpose of circling. He's telling you to circle so that you can trick your opponent deceptively. He also says that when someone circles on you, to just turn. I think it's Fabris. Basically says exactly what you did, Nathan, which is when someone is doing that to you, you just go directly to them. Right? They're trying to go this way. You say, okay, I'm going to come this way too.
And it's also funny, you can actually find that in Eastern sources as well. One of the things that This is kind of like, hey, fencing includes everyone. And I know that this is kind of a HEMA thing, but for those of you that are interested in like Eastern martial arts, specifically the Japanese sword, when they're talking, what's his name? The Book of Five Scrolls, the Book of Five Rings. He
Musashi,
specifically talks about,
right?
Musashi?
it's translated as both. It depends on which translation you get.
No, his name.
The idea of circling is like, well, I want to circle so that my back is to the sun, right? And obviously we don't have that inside in a tournament, right? But
So, that's not true. Sometimes you do.
Sometimes there's a big bright light, or sometimes like Lord Baltimore's challenge last year, there's only one fan per ring, and you want to maneuver yourself. It was so hot. I got to tell you, man.
One fan and no air conditioning.
There was like two fans and no air conditioning. So I would just circle around so that my back was to the fan. And I was like, all right, now let's go.
Did it give you like an extra little boost of like speed?
Yes.
No, but I didn't.
It's like you're playing Mario Kart.
Actually, at one point, I actually had to take my mask off and just like call time and go sit in front of one of those fans because I actually had I was like on that cusp of heat exhaustion.
Yeah, and that's something that was funny. It's not on the like just to be clear, that is not a diss on the tournament organizers.
Oh no,
it was not their fault. The problem was it's a big box gym, and the AC probably should have been turned on the night before so that it has time to cool down. Because they did turn the AC was on, but they turned the AC on in the morning, and then it was like 100 degrees outside. So
yeah, because it was a July in the swamp of Maryland, so it was like when we got there in the morning, and we got there really early. It was like 7:30, 8 o'clock, and it was already like 80 degrees.
But we had this problem.
Yeah.
We've had this problem at Capital Clash before, for the sport fencing side of it, of them being in a room with windows, these massive windows. I think it was actually this year, and it's the middle of the day. The sun's coming in, and if you are standing here, you cannot see because the sun's blinding you, and so your opponent has the advantage.
Yeah.
And that's a historical thing that's talked about in
oh yeah, and they even like they would manufacture it too, right, with the lantern shields with the big light in the middle, and all those goofy things. That
lantern shields, a mirror shield, that like a really 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 shiny shield. So
not just from the Legend of Zelda.
No.
All right, back on topic. I'm sorry, I derailed you guys. It's my fault.
We know.
So here's something that we haven't talked about yet, because we keep talking about fencing, and by fencing we're talking about like sparring or bouting or tournament. We're talking about the game of actually trying to hit each other, right? Do you need to do that in order to be doing HEMA?
No. That's it. There's no.
I agree. No.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Moving on.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I think it's such an obvious no, but at the same time, it may not be obvious to someone that's not familiar with what HEMA really is. So like somebody would come in and be like, oh, cool, you fight with swords. Like 9 times out of 10 when we're at Capital Clash and somebody comes in to check out the cool sword fighting with long swords, they're like, oh, cool, you're hitting each other with long swords. That's really cool. What they don't see is all the people that are doing research, all the people that are doing translations, all the people that are doing all of this like behind the scenes work to try to understand what HEMA is. And some of them probably have either never fought in a tournament or never sparred or spar very little, or just doing solo drills because they can't find a sparring partner because they're in the middle of like nowhere, North Dakota.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's kind of two facets to this, right? Because one thing is that you can be a scholar, right? So a Hema scholar, and literally never, never swing a sword. Although it's funny because back in the day when people were first, I remember talking with Christian Tobler. This was, this was 2007, something like that, and we were just talking about when he first started trying to work with Ringek, and he's like, literally, I had the text there and a sword, and I'm literally reading, and how do we? Okay, I do this, right? And that's how a lot of us started, right? It was literally, and it's how some of us, like, this is a lot of what I've been doing is like, I'm, for instance, in addition to Meyer and some of the other sources that I never worked with before, I'm reading them and I'm literally like, wait, what is going on? What are they doing? And trying to figure it out by myself, sometimes without a sword in my hand, sometimes with a stick or nothing, right? And that's still part of Hema, right? That scholarship side.
Absolutely.
Another thing, though, and this is one that's, I think it's a little more controversial, is, do you need to spar or bounce in order to be doing Hema? And what I mean by this, if I say, okay, Colin and I, we are going to train, we're going to practice the plays from Meyer, right? We're going to practice this technique, right? And then we're done and we don't fence, right? So we only work on practicing the techniques.
But we don't
But we
test
never
it
actually
sparring.
free play or fence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that Hema? Is that fencing?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's important to not like accidentally go down the the logical fallacy of a false dilemma. It's like it doesn't have to be black and white, right? Yeah, like every different aspect from cutting with sharps, cutting the Italian mats, to sparring, to being in good athletic shape, to reading out of the book, to translating like a book. All of those aspects inform the other so that you can make a better implementation of Hema as a whole. But none of them, if done alone, is not Hema, right? Like it's not like, is it like if you do this, it's not Hema, or if you do, then it is.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
There's a lot more nuance and a lot of gray area there. I think that just it's important to acknowledge that you can, in fact, because who you've got. Let's say that you've got like two 70-year-old guys who, like, in 2020 find out that there's such a thing as Hema and they're best friends and they want to pick up some swords and like work through Meyer or work through Liechtenauer. Nobody's going to tell them that they're not doing Hema just because they can't physically like fence. Like that's not that like nobody would think.
But there are people who do think that.
Well, those people are silly.
And
I think it's a very narrow definition of Hema.
But they're. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I just like that's pretty much it. It's a very narrow definition, and I think that generally speaking, now this is like my philosophy degree kicking in. If you have something so narrowly defined that it excludes things that are reasonably understood as being a part of the thing, like if you defined cats as only tabbies, everybody would be like, well, okay, but this thing is definitely a cat though, right? And they're like, well, it's technically it's not a tabby, so it's not really a cat, right? You can't do that. You can't, or even like if you would say like you're talking about cats and somebody was like, oh yeah, I saw this cool lion the other day, and they're like, that's not a cat. Well, yeah, of course it falls under the umbrella, right? So when you go to define something, generally speaking, you want it. God, this is such a language is use argument, and I kind of hate myself for it, but it's true. Language is use. We use the term Hema to mean these things that we do generally speaking. So to like try to cut something out of it that reasonably applies,
Why?
right? Like what's your real goal here? And usually when we're talking about exclusivity versus inclusivity, especially when we're talking about just most things, I think when you're talking about, or when you're trying to exclude something from a definition, what you're trying to do is keep your is to create your goal is to create some sort of purity in whatever you're doing specifically. And it's usually, and this is just my experience, is usually to try to make some greater point for purposes of ego. I don't like that idea. I like the idea of inclusivity. We include as much as we can, and that should be the goal, right? We should try to include all of the scholars who are doing great work. We should try to include all the people who are only doing drills in their backyard. I actually have two friends, my wife's sister and her husband, love Hema, have never been to a tournament, have never been to a class. They literally just read the sources and try to work it out for themselves. They're mostly able-bodied, but they just don't go to tournaments. They don't go to schools. But I would never exclude them, right? And because we create this inclusivity, and if our goal is to create a well-defined idea of, or a well-defined understanding of Hema, we have to take usage as our basis point. It's kind of just how definitions work.
But Colin, if your instructor doesn't win medals in tournaments, if your instructor's not an excellent fencer, why are you taking lessons from them? You can't be a good coach, right? Unless you are also a top level fencer, right? Should I stop?
I know, it like,
before we
start.
You know
what really grinds my gears?
By the way,
yeah, no, that grinds my gears a lot, and it specifically comes from the idea that you it's like that old crappy adage: if you can't do, you teach.
Oh God,
it's like, but now apparently you also have to do to be able to teach. But then there'll be the first, like, I don't know. It's just like this. All of this doesn't make any sense. Teaching is a different skill.
Absolutely. So, I mean, some of the best instructors I have, or I've met, are not particularly great fencers.
Yeah.
Right. And on that note, some of the best fencers I know are horrible instructors because they don't even oftentimes know. They just do it. They don't know how to tell you how to do it because, like you said, those are two different skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Those are 100% two different.
You look skills. At like any professional sport. Like, I'm taking a leap here, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure 90 to 100% of the time, the dude who is that soccer team's coach or that football team's coach, if you were to throw him out on the field, he would not do very well.
Yeah. So that's actually kind of funny because a lot of sports will still make the same fallacy though, and they'll think that, oh, this guy used to play, he was really good, let's put him in as a coach, and it just never works out, or it not often doesn't work out, because they have to foster that skill of teaching. Okay, so I come from a baseball background. So whenever I talk about this, I talk about, and also I'm from Maryland. So Billy Ripken and Cal Ripken. Who knows who Billy Ripken is? That's no? Okay, so Billy Ripken is Cal Ripken's brother. You've probably heard of Cal Ripken Jr.
Nope.
He had a brother. What? No?
Nope. I was never a sports person, ever.
But he was famous, like, outside of baseball.
That's okay. You know what? We love you, Nathan. And
thanks.
Even though you've never heard of my personal childhood,
you disappoint
hero,
us.
I think that okay, so Cal Ripken Jr. played baseball for a really long time, but he was most famous for being the Iron Man, it's the Iron Man, because he played, like, I think it was like almost 3,000 games in a row without
He
missing a single day.
Never
Oh my
missed a
God.
game. Yeah, never missed a game.
So that was one thing, but he's actually less famous, or I should say, in the field of baseball, he's actually more famous for being a great player who revolutionized the position of shortstop. Before him, shortstops looked like us. They were short, stocky, scrappy dudes who were just fast. Cal Ripken Jr. was 6'2", and he was not scrappy. He was long, and he just used his length in a way that like completely revolutionized. Now every shortstop has to be 6 foot or taller. And that's like anyway, he was a fantastic player. But he had a brother named Billy Ripken. And so when Cal Ripken tried to coach anyone, he was a fantastic player, terrible coach, absolutely garbage tier coach. He would just be like, I don't know, you just run at the ball and then you grab it with you put your glove in front of the ball. And that's it. That's literally how you do it. And then he has this brother who grew up with him, played through the farm system, I believe. So he was he played AAA. I think he played AA and AAA. And then afterwards he just became a coach. And that's literally all he did. He was above average player, obviously, to play AAA ball, but that was his claim to fame. He coached, and he coached really well. He had a whole video series of coaching. I think he coached set in several Little League World Series. He coached the professionals as well. He was like an assistant coach for, I don't think it was for the Orioles, but anyway, so that's the idea. There's Cal Ripken, there's the great player, right, who can't coach for shit, and then there's Billy Ripkens, who are, okay, but they have trained themselves in the art of coaching and the art of teaching, and two different skills. I just like it that it happens to be the two guys in that are brothers. And
yeah, I mean that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
I know there's examples in other sports of people who have never done that sport. Like I think, like boxing or something like that. They just watch it and they understand it so well,
Mhm.
and they're able to explain it so well. I mean, there are examples of coaches who literally have never did that sport ever,
Mhm.
but they don't have to because they just understand it, right? And so, I mean, yeah, the idea that you have to be really good at fencing to be a good coach is, like I said, it's a dumb idea.
Yeah.
That being said, it is nice to have, if you're going to be using free play and fencing as a learning tool, which is what it should be, you need people who are going to challenge you, right? But that doesn't necessarily have to be your coach, right?
Yeah.
That can be the other students. That can be, the other fencers that are very good, right? All right. So we've been talking a lot about fencing. We've been talking a lot about competition, right? What does it, and we're talking about Hema, right? So historical European martial arts. So here it comes. What does it mean to be martial, right? And does your rule set have to be martial to be a good rule set? And well, I guess let's start there.
This is going to be the podcast of strong opinions, I think.
Oh yeah.
I'm not taking this one.
I actually first let's just say, like, when you hear the word martial, what do you think that means? First, that's what I'd like to do.
I mean, the common understanding of it is like, a fight to the death, essentially, or a simulated fight to the death.
Yeah. Right. Okay. But and yeah, so that's a lot of people when they hear the word martial, to them that means must be like deadly, right? Or involve injury, right?
I think of the guy that beat me in in the Surfo pools
Why is that?
because he was the only one beat me. His name is Marshall.
Marshall Strong.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
real good.
Oh,
He's a nice guy too.
Speaking of rivals, I'm very disappointed that there will be no Surfo this year because the last 2 years we have met in the finals of Longsword, and so I officially have a Hema rival now. So I was looking forward to repeating that again this year.
I do not envy you of such a strong rival.
I mean, it's
He
his
is-
last name. So
He is a
my butt.
strong rival,
It's strong. Oh,
and his
thanks, Nathan.
his fencing is quite martial as well. Oh God, this is terrible. All right, no, but so what does it mean to be Marshall? Right?
That is like the $6 million question, isn't it?
So first of all, I think we should because there's one thing. It's the way that most people tend to use it. Like for instance, they'll say, "All right, well, okay, so if I am reading this book, right, which is the Anonymous Milanese Treatise, which actually just came out fairly recently, so you should get this.
Mhm.
I think it's on Lulu, available on Lulu. I believe
Is that a
so.
hardcover?
Yeah, hardcover.
Oh.
And this is awesome because this is a really important source that has not really been readily available in English. So it's awesome to finally have a translation of that. But when you're doing the research side of Hema, right? A lot of it, as I mentioned earlier, right, is literally sword in hand, book in the other hand. How does this technique work, right? And so usually people will say, well, okay, so your interpretation of this technique has to, one, fit the text, and two, it has to be martially effective, right? So and then people usually by that, to me, they mean it needs to work in a real context, right? Like if someone's trying to kill you, you have to be able to make pull this technique off.
Hmm. Actually, that was kind of what you were getting at before too. Like, do you have to also spar?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And this is where I'll go back, right? For a long time, people were really against tournaments for a variety of reasons. Some of them valid, some of them not. But one thing that happened when people started doing tournaments is everyone's interpretation suddenly got way better, and a lot of ideas that people had about what certain techniques were, people were like, "Oh, that's definitely not, because this is not at all effective," right? Now, on the flip side, just because it doesn't work in a tournament doesn't not necessarily mean that it's not correct, because psychologically it's much different when you're wearing gear versus not wearing gear, right?
Yep. Not just psychologically. In fact,
physically, yes.
Physically,
if that's where you're going, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very different wearing gear. Specifically, like I found out the hard way that my gorget sucks. And the hard way was when I went to do something above my head and my gorget choked me, and I was like, "Oh, I can't do that." Okay, well, maybe I just need to go back to my Destroyer mods one because it's so low profile. But like, yeah,
I have short limbs, like, or my arms are short,
Mhm.
so I have zero problem doing like ox when I'm not wearing gear. But as soon as I put on gear, I mean, I cannot do a crossed arms ox to
Yeah.
save my life, right? So gear definitely affects things.
Yeah. And that's if that's if you get the appropriate sized
Yeah.
gear, which is another thing. Like,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you could say a lot for, this works in a tournament, this doesn't work in a tournament. Marshal application.
So, and this is where I'm, I guess, trying to lead the conversation, right? The word martial literally just means having to do with Mars, right? The god of war.
Yeah.
So it has to do with, if something is martial, it has to do with learning to fight,
Mhm.
right? And I think, I don't think, but we've created a dichotomy between sports and martial that I don't think, as we kind of learned last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess, with Jean-Marie, that's not really necessarily historical, right?
Yeah.
Like what is sports and what is martial, using martial, right? I don't think, to me, I actually don't think that's a useful definition, right? A useful dichotomy,
Mhm.
because I think in many cases they're kind of one and the same, right? I mean, you can argue that a duel to the death is a game. It's
Yeah.
a sport.
Even so, what was it Jean-Marie said, that only like 25% of recorded duels ended in death, like as far as
Yeah. And
the source that he was citing had figured, like,
It was at
what was the other 75%? Was that not Marshall?
And specifically, exactly. And specifically, he even said of those 25%, many of them were like accidental. Like they didn't want to kill the guy. It was just like, oops.
like, yeah, oops, he stepped forward onto my sword and it went through his eye.
Right. Like I just meant to just knock him out. Like, I'm really sorry. Or like when he was talking
Really,
about
that's what you tell the
street
sheriff.
things where it was
Yeah.
like, look, this guy was drunk and he came at me. I tried to get him away. I tried to get him away again. I tried to get him away again. And then finally the last time I hit him with my sword. I just hit him with the flat. I didn't mean to kill him. Like, but there are historical sources for that.
So one of my favorite things, right, is, and this is the debate that's been going on for as long as,
and will continue.
And will continue, right? Meyer, right? I said I've been doing a lot of Meyer. A lot of people, I would probably say even most people.
Meyer's just sport fencing.
Exactly. Meyer is.
I said it for you.
You said it for me. Meyer is sport fencing, right? Why? Because he says we don't thrust. And that's actually the main reason is, one, we don't thrust, and two, we hit with the flat sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Now that actually directly contradicts Meyer, where he says this is training for war. Several places he says, and he even says, "Oh, you should do this while wearing armor. Like, you should put on your cuirass and practice in it daily." I think he says, wear your armor daily. And people always think of the flat hit as a sport strike, but to use a very timely phrase, a flat hit is not a non-lethal attack. It is a less lethal, right? It's a
less than lethal round.
Less than lethal. It's a rubber bullet.
And I have seen the effect of rubber bullets, and sure, it's less than lethal. That is.
So one of my students, Jesse Jeffries, he's a big gun guy, and he and a couple other guys were getting into a discussion about like the effectiveness of various sized rounds of ammunition, and the tie-in. So he's like, okay, well, one person will say that kind of round doesn't do a lot of damage, and that this other kind of round does. Well, tell you what, I'll shoot you with both, and you tell me which one you want to get shot with again. Like, it's the same thing. I'll hit you with the blade and I'll hit you with the flat. And you tell me which one you want me to do it again. Like, they both suck.
Yeah.
Getting hit is bad, period.
I will just say, I have already gotten into one Facebook, not argument, but I challenged somebody that's pretty up there in the Hema community on the Prel House specifically. And this was a while ago, so don't you even think about going and looking for it. This was a while ago, but I definitely challenged him on it, because it was they were talking about in tournaments disqualifying flat hits to the head, and I was like, well, I don't understand. And I was so young. I was so new to this. And I was like, but like, I read Meyer, and Meyer says to do that specifically. And it's like KO. And it's specifically useful because you're using the flexibility of your sword to penetrate their defense where they think they're defended. It's a really useful technique, and I really like doing it because somebody will block me and say haha and still get hit in the head. You can't do that with the blade. And
And I think I'm not going to say, I'm going to make a claim here that I have not tested empirically. I'm pretty sure you can hit harder with the flat than you can with the edge.
Yes, absolutely. I
Because
was playing.
you can snap it so much easier.
I was playing with that at practice on Wednesday night, in fact, and like I was much more able to clear swords out of the way, like send them flying out of the way when I struck with the flat. So much so that I was not able to capitalize on the extra opening as much as I thought it was, because it surprised me so much. Like I kept doing it, I'm like, oh my god, his sword's way over there. But by that point, of course, the time to pull off the technique is gone. But you can hit way harder. I will say, Colin, I think as a tournament organizer, and David may agree with me, I don't know, but no, good. When it comes to the hits with the flat, one of the main reasons why like I tend to not count those is because a lot of the times people are not doing Prellhouse. They are trying to hit somebody with the blade, and their form is just so bad that the flat is what ends up hitting them, and it just like. That's a different thing, right? Like if you're trying to hit somebody with the flat on purpose, then that definitely matters. But like if you're trying to promote proper form, whatever a given tournament might call that, then it's important to acknowledge that like improper form of a poorly aligned blade needs to be punished in some way.
Yeah, like I can see that, but so my retort would be, how do you distinguish that in your rule set? Do you just leave it up to judges to decide, or do you just say, well, flat hits are just out?
So I think, because I very much agree here with Nathan. I think the whole point is you need to decide what your rule set's purpose is and what you are trying to accomplish with your rule set. Right?
Does it make a difference?
Does it?
Doesn't?
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, because like even if you change your rule set, does that really mean that like are you going to get different fencing, or is that fencer who has bad edge alignment still going to have bad edge alignment? I guess your argument would be that you're not rewarding them for the bad edge alignment, right? Which that makes sense, but like I don't know. I'm on the fence about it, I guess.
So, I mean, I think the answer is yes and no, right? Rule sets do change behavior, but they also don't necessarily sometimes matter. And I'll give an example. There are some rule sets I know. I'm not going to name names because I can't confirm this for sure, but that don't care at all about the quality of the hits. So if it's a touch, it's a touch, right? Whether it's the edge or the flats or whatever, and it's for the entire body. And if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. I'm fine with that, right? On the other hand, if you're trying to say, well, we want to at least try to get people to fence more historically, if anything, any touch is a touch, then I can be a lot more aggressive and a lot more just crazy with my attacks because I just need to touch you, especially if I just need to touch you before you touch me. So rule sets definitely can influence behavior. The last few years, we changed this actually this past year, but the previous years at Capital Clash, we super incentivized a thrust to the head or the torso. Like, the difference being that you could score 6 points versus 1 point for like a cut to the arm, right?
Thanks.
We changed it. You're welcome. We changed it, so there's still a heavy incentive for a thrust to the head or torso, but it's a smaller incentive now. And sure, it is going to change how people fence, but I think really what it does is that it changes the techniques you're going to rely on. Your skill as a fencer is the same. That doesn't change, right? And I think we see this played out because there are so many different rule sets just in the US, right? You pretty much almost every tournament has their own rule set, right? And usually when you see a good fencer go to that, they'll usually do well regardless of the rule set, right? So like rule sets matter and they don't matter.
I would also like to say I actually really like that tournaments have different rule sets. I know a lot of people would say like it makes it more complicated, but like Nathan's doing Nathan, and that's awesome. Whether it's flat hits don't count or toes are worth 1,500 points, whatever, man. It's cool that we're all doing something a little bit different because then we can find like things that work, things that don't work. We can kind of understand what we're doing a little bit better, and everything is just that little bit of variety is like literally the spice of life, right? So
It's also historical as well. I mean,
right, and Jean-Marie said, yeah.
Going back again to the podcast with Jean-Marie, he was talking about I think it was a journeyman of some sort who went from place to place to place, slowly moving, I think, from Germany to Spain, or like Bohemia through Germany into Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And that like every locale had their own wrestling traditions, and they were all slightly different from each other, right? And each thing trains different things. You know, like you go to Capital Clash, show us how good you are at thrusts. You go to some other event, show us how good you are at making Prellhouse. You go to another event, show us how good you are at closing the distance and throwing people down to the ground. All of those things matter. And it's very good, I think, to have vastly different rule sets that promote all different types of whatever they're trying to promote.
Yep, 100% agree.
And I think that what the most important thing is to understand is that whatever you do, it is a game. So decide what game you want your fencers to play, right?
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of people that want to find that perfect rule set that is going to accurately reflect real sword fight, like a real duel to the death. But there's no way to simulate that, right? Except a real duel to the death with sharp swords, right?
But that's not a simulation.
It's not a simulation, right? That's what I said. There's no way to simulate it, right? So
yeah.
And even then, that's you're starting. Your assumption is starting from it's a false premise. The idea that a sword fight is a duel to the death. Could be, but there's lots of cases where it wasn't, right?
And I just like to point
75%.
Out the amazing thing to me is that people are trying to get closer to it, but in reality, I don't see. Okay, so let me even first of all expose myself as a huge weeb. Even in something like Sword Art Online, where you could get into a virtual a virtual server where your consciousness is literally there and you feel everything that's happening to you. If you don't actually have the punishment of death behind whatever you're doing, that is a fake simulation. Like that's a bad simulation. So trying to get close to it, to me, is one of those things that's like you're like bow fishing from like 80 yards inward, like 80 yards away from the lake. You're trying to bow fish and you're like, well, I think the fish is kind of in this direction, so let me just let one loose. It's like no, you're not even close. And they're like, well, let me move 2 paces closer to the shore, though. Right? It's like,
Yeah.
no.
If I can,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to say 2 things. One, jumping back to what we were talking about a minute ago, with regards to different rule sets and the importance of them and like what different things can bring out. I was at Long Point in 20 something, I don't know, probably 2015, 16, and
I think it was 14.
14. Yeah, I remember you. And I was fighting with Casper Anderson in the second round after the pools, and I think that year they had some sort of thing in the rules where if you did a particular technique, the highest score you could get was like 8 points or something obscene. It was really high, and
7.
7.
I think.
And like it only required like 11 points or something to win a match, and I had a 4-point lead on Casper. And so I was like, all right, cool. Well, if I just do this one thing, then I win and we're done, right? Because 4 + 7 is 11. I may be getting the numbers wrong a little bit, but the premise is that different rule sets, not only do they bring out different parts of your technique, but they also challenge you to do different things like meta game wise, because I lost the match because I became so fixated on trying to get that 7-point thing that he just wrecked me. Like, he was nickel and diming me, and I was like, nah, I just gotta get it. And then like at that point, it was done because I was like, oh, I've been trying to just stab him in the throat instead of just continuing to do what was working already. And like I let my brain get away from me, which is also an important thing that we need to work on and make sure that we can train and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if that was the same year where you had the one hit kill. Where
yeah, it was.
it was.
think so. Yeah.
And that was an interesting idea, and
Interesting
also
Marshal simulation.
well, yeah. So the idea was if you hit your opponent basically with control to a deep target, you would score them. You would win in one hit. The idea being kind of to encourage people to try to use. So let me backtrack for a second. So Jake Norwood, organizer of Long Point. Well, hey, people now. I mean,
I know.
He's kind of gone. He's kind of a hermit now. We need to find a way to. We need to get him on here. Is actually what we need to do. But he
no
way.
I hate him.
He is big into game theory, right? And he flat out said the whole purpose of my tournament, right, of Long Point, it is a game, and I am making the rules this way because I want to get my fencers to fence the way that I want them to fence, which was specifically Liechtenauer's longsword, right? To try to use winding and binding and winding and thrusting. And there was success and there was other things that didn't work, right? So for instance, with the one hit kill, the one I think of the biggest problems we discovered was that it's so, because judging is so arbitrary is not the right word, but it's so subjective that people were winning matches in one hit, and in fact they didn't actually do the technique, right? So we kind of realized that, oh, maybe that's not a great plan, because you're going to then kind of do a disservice to your fencers, right? Because that might be a double, but the judges call it as this, and they went. And we see the same thing. This is actually, I'm going to go out on a limb here and probably take some flack for this. I'm not going to use the word hate. I dislike most first blood type rule sets. Not because I dislike the idea, but I dislike the way that most of them are implemented, which is that the idea that most people have is that we want to encourage people to do what we were saying at the beginning, right? Which is to hit without being hit, right? So we want to encourage defensive fencing, right? So if yours a double hit, you both lose, right? But the problem with it is that it actually incentivizes aggressive fencing. Because if my opponent is going to be defensive, if my opponent tries to follow the rules and be defensive and not cause a double, and I attack, then I have an advantage, right? Because I can just game the rules to win. Not that there's necessarily a problem with that, but me personally, I don't enjoy that, right? And that's why going back to saying, having lots of different rule sets, I think is great because, if you don't like that rule set, you don't have to use it. At the same time, if you don't like that rule set, it's a good idea to fence with it because you're going to learn something from it, right?
Yeah, I think I've actually learned the most about fencing from being under really strict rule sets that I hate.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point, right? You hate the new Capital Clash square fencing ring,
Rectangle.
right? The
It
rectangle.
wasn't that bad.
But like a lot of people didn't like it. And
No. Everyone complains, and every single one of those people who complained to me then came up to me afterwards and was like, "Oh, that was fine."
Sorry,
Yeah.
David.
Yeah. I remember when we were testing it and and I was like, oh man, especially in Rapier, specifically in Rapier, because, Destreza. But David pointed out to me, he was like, Destreza, you really shouldn't be circling. You're moving in 45 degree, you're 45 degrees off of where you are. You're not really circling, right? The circle is drawn, but that's not really how you move. And he was right. But the whole thing, it felt constricting to me, and just that feeling was enough to change but once I got used to it, I was like, oh, this isn't constricting, A, and B, even if it were a little bit constricting, it's actually teaching me to use better footwork, not more footwork, right? The quality over quantity of footwork. I'm not circling. It's not goldfish for 4 hours. It's I'm fencing. That's my opponent. I'm going to go get them, right? So
Well,
yeah,
and
I restrict people until you learn something.
yeah, and that the whole reason I did it is because one of my big pet peeves is people just getting in a match and just start walking in circles, right? Because I'm like, fence, right? So having a non-circular format, it's actually still possible to do with our rings,
Well,
but
it is,
it's
but
harder
it
to do.
causes a risk, right?
It causes a risk, right?
On the short side, you try to circle that way, and if your opponent circles that way, all of a sudden you're in real close distance.
But what's interesting to me is that people complained to me prior to that, right? That like, well, I don't like this because it's non-historical. And I said, what's historical about a ring? Right? Why is a ring more historical?
They actually really wanted you to bring the barricade out so they could fence over the barricade. I think that's what they really wanted.
Now, we do have some examples of rings. We also have examples of like octagons. We have dueling areas that are big squares or rectangles. We have all sorts of different examples. So to think that one is more real than the other, a circle's no more realistic than a rectangle is.
Yeah.
And you can even make the argument that the rectangle might be more historic in a certain context, right? If I'm fighting you
in a room
or an alleyway, or I don't have all of that room, right? And again, that goes back to, well, we're not really trying necessarily to recreate that. 'Cause like I said, for Capital Clash, right? The rule set that I created for that, I am not trying to simulate a duel to the death. I'm simply trying to get fencers to fence how I want them to fence.
It's
What
a
I
it's a
think
training game.
is good fencing and pretty fencing and what I want to see.
It's a historical training game,
It's a game.
which is
It's 100% a game.
I think that's probably, I'm sorry to our other guests. Jean-Rie's talk was like the most enlightening for me so far.
The same, man. It was very, very, very educational and informative. And I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Really excited.
I'm 100% on board with you. And like specifically when he was talking about like the idea that this is how they trained. They didn't have drills. It was basically what we're doing now, but it was a little bit more like wacky, honestly, like the clown that paddles you and like, yeah.
So I took us back off topic when I had brought up my long point experience with Casper, but one thing that I wanted to say on the the martiality of the rule sets and stuff like that, and trying to recreate a duel, is that after that podcast with Jean-Rie where we brought him on, I have been doing a lot of thinking, and it almost seems that it is less historically accurate to try and simulate a duel to the death, because yes, we know that they did those, obviously, like the manuscripts talk about them, the techniques, and all that stuff. But as far as I know, we don't have a lot of evidence of them pretending that they were having a duel to the death. They just played games, which we do have evidence of. They played historical games that each trained different aspects of fighting, closing and throwing to the ground without getting hit, or, here, drag them into the hole like you're pulling somebody off a horse or whatever. So there is more historical evidence of how they trained with their games than there is of how they trained to simulate a real duel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And,
there's a term
and,
for that.
And there's there may be some people who might say, oh well, they couldn't safely train and simulate a duel like we can, but that's BS, because they had tournament helms. They could just put on their armor and say, okay, Hans, you hit me in the head, I would be dead now, let's reset. Like there's no reason that they couldn't do that.
And they did do it.
They did do that sometimes.
Did they?
Yeah, there's examples of that. There's examples of wearing like big poofy hats to protect your head,
right?
And then even I know there's examples of wearing a metal skull cap underneath your poofy hat in order to protect your head. So essentially wearing a fencing helmet, especially if you're not allowing thrust to the eyes. Yeah, I mean, another one, right? Foil fencing, modern foil fencing, right? The rules are not that different from the earliest rule set that we have for foil fencing from the 17th century, which is rapier fencing using a foil, right? Using a practice sword. But it's literally basically, torso's the target. If the attacker gets priority over the counter attacker, right?
Yeah.
So right of way. Mm-hmm. It's a game. And the whole purpose of the game was to try to teach people to fence safely and also attack. They wanted you to do. I don't know if we know for sure why I've never known for sure why they limit it to just the torso. I think they left the face out probably because they probably weren't wearing masks. But why didn't they include arms and legs? But and there might be multiple reasons for that. But one of them might be that, well, by making the torso, this is one that's the lethal target, right? Mm-hmm. More lethal target, and it's also harder to hit, right? Without getting hit. So again, it's a game.
Yeah. I've been racking my brain. I think it's called relational training, because there's direct training and then something else, and I think it's like relationship or something like that. But it's basically, the idea is there's training for something where you're doing that thing, like that exact movement. Like if you're training to like deadlift, you train a deadlift, like you're doing a deadlift to train. But there's also tangential or relational training where you're like doing different movements. Maybe you're doing like bicep crunches with a dumbbell or something like that. You're
Yeah, I
still
mean,
training the
it's
muscle.
assistance
Yeah,
training is usually like
assistance
when,
training. Yeah, that's what I was.
so like when you're going, if you like deadlifting, there's a whole bunch of assistance moves that you can do to work on aspects of your deadlift.
Yeah, and it
Right?
works exactly the same with Hema. You're training the skill through the means of a game, right? And which is great because it A motivates you, and B it will give you instant feedback, right? Like you did this right, or no, you didn't do this right. But yeah, it's exactly the same thing as you're training a muscle. You're not doing the exact thing, but you're doing something pretty close. I would also say like people in that time, maybe I'm wrong because I don't know that much about it, but like if you knew that something was going to be potentially lethal and you had time, like you would put on harness. Like what idiot would be like, well, this guy wants to fight me in the whatever, or we're going to war. I'd better, grab my longsword and, well, it's maybe I'll leave my armor at home. Like, no, like it's such a goofy idea. Like Blastfectin in general to me seems like this is something that we do to train, right? But maybe like street tussles were not that common. I don't know. It just seems like one of those things where if you know something's going to be lethal, like an actual duel to the death, you're not going to, I don't know, you're not going to leave anything up to chance, right?
Well,
You're not gonna be like, oh, I'll meet you fair and square.
since you brought it up, I actually, this is funny because this is a idea that I think several people have come to independently, and then which to me is quite interesting. So myself, Bill Grandy, I think a few other people as well. That there's a false dichotomy that we, like back in the day when we first started doing Hema, and let's be honest, most of Hema is longsword, right? Most people think of longsword for Hema, and people think of Bloschfechten or unarmored fighting, right? But most people do that and don't do the harness. But Liechtenauer teaches three things, right? He teaches fencing with the longsword, which, if you don't know, he doesn't mean a long sword. He means a sword held like this. So you're fencing long with it or extended, as opposed to grabbing it and half swording, which is fencing with the shortened sword, which is what we think of as or half swording, right, or shortened sword. So we think of that as harness fechten, right? And then he teaches Roschfechten, which is on horseback. Two of those three are assumed or kind of explicitly armored. And then Bloschfechten, right, or fighting with the longsword, is considered to be unarmored fighting. But I think that's a mistake, because one, the likelihood of you ending up in a street fight with a longsword, or any kind of fight with in street clothes, essentially medieval street clothes, with a longsword, are probably fairly slim. And even in a duel, I think the likelihood of that occurring is probably pretty small. More likely than not, if you're fighting, you're going to be in some, either maybe it's a street fight, maybe it's a skirmish as a soldier, and you might be facing someone who's wearing a breastplate and helmets and gauntlets, right? was very common for people to wear partial harness, right? You know, we think of wearing a suit of armor, but a lot of times they might, or maybe they're just wearing a helmet, right? Or maybe they're just wearing a breastplate, right? And so this idea that Bloschfechten is unarmored fighting is incorrect, because Blosch actually can mean like nakedness or opening, and we're told to like seek the openings. So
I'm not gonna lie, I thought it meant blouse. Wearing a
um,
blouse.
no, I mean it literally means like I mean you can translate it as like naked, but it means like uncovered. I guess maybe it would be so we kind of independently came to this idea that it's not two separate things. Half swording is what you do when your opponent is wearing lots of armor, enough armor that you cannot use the edge to aim for the opening. Fighting with the longsword is what you do when your opponent has openings. They might still be wearing a breastplate, right? So maybe you can't hit them on the body, right? So maybe you have to thrust them in the armpit, right? And that kind of opened my eyes a little bit and made actually all of a sudden it was actually a lot more interesting to me. And we actually started doing a lot of games and free play of like, okay, you have a breastplate on, right? You don't, right? You have a helmet, you don't, and like and kind of this mismatched armor, and it's quite interesting. And when you look at kind of the contemporary to Lichtenauer that people think of, which is Fiore, right? He doesn't separate the two. He has his armored and unarmored fighting together, and he'll say, "Oh, this is better when you're wearing armor," or "This is better when you're not wearing armor." But I think that idea that they were two very separate things is no. If I don't have to half sword, maybe I'm wearing armor, but my opponent's not. So I'm not going to half sword. I'm going to, or if they're just wearing a breastplate, I'm going to use cuts and cut them on the arm or the head, right? Or thrust them in the head. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes total sense. It's if you're, and again, that just, if you're used to playing the game where, oh man, you can't hit them in the chest, the game incentivizes hits to the foot, and all they're wearing on their feet is boots. It's like, maybe this was training all along.
Yeah.
Cue the X-Files music. And you know what? I think that's a good one to go out on, since we are an hour and 40 minutes into this, gentlemen.
This is I think this was a good talk though.
Yeah, I agree. Feel good about it, and
I just noticed this in front of me.
Myers.
I have to, while I'm reading Meyer, I have to light this candle.
That's such a Catholic sentiment. You didn't even know it.
No, Meyer was a Protestant.
I know. That's why I'm saying, like, he'd hate it. He would not be a big fan. All right, guys, we should probably wrap up there. What a chat, though.
Yeah.
And thanks, viewers, for hanging out with us for this long. This has been, whew, if you made it to the end, you're a true fan.
Drinks on Colin.
What was that?
Drinks on Colin if they made it to the end.
Sure. If you made it to the end, I'll give you this password, and I'll buy you a drink at the next event. And the password is, oh man, somebody think of something clever. Myers lavender candle. That's the password, and I'll buy you a
deal.
I'll buy you a drink.
Remember that, David, because he didn't say that he didn't say that we're excluded.
You are not excluded, but I buy you drinks at every event anyway. Good.
Mrs. Myers, by the way.
Oh, Mrs. Myers. All right, so that now you may have to make it all the way to the end. It's Mrs. Myers. lavender
Oh
candle.
dear. All
Uh,
right, guys. Y'all have a good rest of your day and a happy 4th of July.
yeah,
You-
same.
you
Happy
too.
4th. You know.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Right.